You're listening to the Clive Barker Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the imagination of Clive Barker. Please do us a favor and subscribe wherever you get your audio so you never miss an episode. In 292, Jose and Ryan discuss the 1991 book, Pandemonium by Eclipse. This episode is sponsored by Don Bertram's Celebrate Imagination. Don Bertram's Celebrate Imagination shop is dedicated to the arts and medicine program at Texas Children's Cancer Center. Up to 50% of the proceeds will support the program where artist Don Bertram volunteers monthly. Don Bertram is a longtime friend of Clive and celebrates and continues to be inspired by his art. He uses that inspiration to help kids through the Texas Children's Cancer Center, and we couldn't be more thrilled to continue to work with him. There's a news feature video that shows Don working with the kids at Texas Children's Cancer Center and his artwork. Click the side banner at www.clivebarkercast.com to find links to videos and his Etsy shop where you can buy his prints, books, and support this wonderful program. Well, thanks for joining us. This is the Clive Barker Podcast, episode 292. And good morning, Jose.
Hi, Ryan. How are you doing today?
Good. I guess it's not morning for you.
It's not. It's about 1:30, and it's a lovely Sunday, Valentine's Day. The snow's outside, and I had to shovel snow for the first time last week, which wasn't fun. But I mean, at least I don't live in Alaska.
Oh, well, yeah. Yep. Yeah, we still have snow. We got our first snow in October.
And you go to work on riding a moose.
Right. Yeah. My commute's really short. It only takes me about 5 to 10 minutes to get to work, depending on if the lights are with me or not.
Oh, that's great. My commute is just walking from the breakfast nook to the living room desk. Yeah.
Well, no, is that so? That job, is that something where that's only because of pandemic that it's that way, or would it have been that way anyway?
No, it would have been. We would have all been in the building if it wasn't for the pandemic. It became telework thanks to the pandemic, which saves a lot of money on fuel and saves a lot of money on other things. And
but at the same time, in the future, it might save them on office space if they keep it up.
Oh yeah, for sure. I only had to go to the company a building a couple of times. One of them was when I was picking up the tote with the computer and the screen and the monitor and all the stuff. And then the second time when I became permanent, I had to go there just to show some documentation, and that has to be seen in person thanks to federal laws. And basically I drove half an hour to go there, got into the building with my mask, got my temperature taken, walked down the hall to an office where someone was there. They looked at my documentation. I was like, okay, thanks for stopping by. And I just had to come back out and drive half an hour back home. And I was like, that, and I already had sent them like copies of it. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm still working at the office. That hasn't changed for us.
Yeah. Everybody who was working at the company before I joined, keep singing praises to like the maisonette that there's on top of the building. Like there's a terrace with like a little restaurant on the top, and people go there in the morning and have breakfast, and apparently they have really good breakfast potatoes and stuff. And I'm like, and when I became permanent, I got a package envelope with a $10 coupon for the maisonette restaurant. And I'm like, I wonder when I'm going to be able to use this.
Yeah.
So who knows?
Jeez.
A lot of this stuff really, a lot of this telework, hopefully even after the pandemic is over, hopefully some of this stuff will remain like as a telework, because honestly, I think this is very convenient for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't say I would like to go back to a building, but at the same time, I do miss being able to know what my coworkers look like instead of just chatting with them on whatever platform we're in every day. Most of them, I don't even know what they look like because nobody bothers to put their picture on their chat, corporate chat. So, one of the coworkers I chat the most with, I don't even know what they look like.
Do you guys use we at my office for meetings now? We use Microsoft Teams all the time. Is that what you guys use?
That's what we use, Teams.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which I'd never heard of until the pandemic. Same thing with Zoom. I'd never heard of Zoom either until...
Right. Yeah, Zoom became a thing. I'd heard of Zoom before the pandemic. My last job had a lot of Zoom meetings, but they were done in Zoom meeting offices at the building where the company was. Oh. So you'd go into a meeting room. There were these little meeting rooms that were completely made out of glass, and there was a big screen on the TV, and you'd be able to sit there and talk to someone in Chicago or something like that. So
right, and you'd have other people sit physically in the meeting with you.
Yeah. You'd be like a seminar with someone who's in a different headquarter or something like that. So
yeah,
that was done through Zoom. But yeah, and before Teams, we used to chat through, I think it was an Atlassian platform. I forgot what it was called. But yeah. It was, anyway, so I hope everybody is keeping their sanity together and and not going too crazy about this, because I know a lot of people have been hitting their pandemic wall, which I myself have been kind of hitting that wall, but it's really hard. It's been hard, and especially now with the snow and all this stuff and this cold winter that Hey David, I know you've been posting stuff that you're at minus 20 right now, and Ryan, you're at minus 20 too, right?
Yeah. Yep, which is actually warm for this time of year. I mean, typically in January, February, we at least get a couple of weeks of minus 30 to minus 60.
Oh, sure. So I guess you go outside in your short sleeves and, Hawaiian shirt.
Today wasn't minus 20 is not too bad, and it was like 0 yesterday, which was great. That you can wear a t-shirt and stuff.
It's 0 Fahrenheit.
Yeah. 0 is like spring.
Wow. Well, where it's really hot right now? L.A., which is where Clive Barker lives.
Okay. Yes, that's quite a segue. But yeah. So and today's discussion, of course, which we is the 1991 book Pandemonium, which is
not Pandemonicum.
Yeah. What?
Pandemic.
I see.
I was trying to make a joke. Never mind.
Okay. Well, all right. Yes.
Pandemiconium.
Oh my God. Yeah, it does have sort of the first the first 7 letters of pandemic in it.
Yeah. But anyway, so it's easy to be an artist in a place where your paints don't freeze in the tubes.
Well, presumably you'd keep them indoors.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess that we have one quick news thing from the Reef. The Clive Barker Threadless store has Harvey and Lulu T-shirt designs.
From Thief of Always.
Yeah. So check those out. That's really cool. I'm very tempted to get one of those. I may just do that. I still have my Boo T-shirt that I bought from them, so I'm thinking I might get that one too.
Oh,
I love the black designs with white sketches. Like our first T-shirt design that we did too. Is kind of like that.
And you can get not just T-shirts, but also mugs, notebooks, and travel mugs.
Yeah, so check out the Clive Barker Threadless design, and we have a link in the show notes.
Hey, it's time for the Great Beast February, so that's kind of very opportune for a Harvey Swick T-shirt. And
I think that's why they showed up in the Threadless store on this month, which is pretty neat. That's a cool idea, probably by Phil and Sarah.
Yeah, the Great Beast February had swallowed Harvey Swick whole.
Yeah,
kind of know that by heart.
Right.
Awesome. And it's, this helps out Clive Barker. It's completely licensed. So go to that Threadless store. It's clivebarker.threadless.com.
Yeah. So on to Pandemonium. This is a book that actually I bought probably when I first got into Clive Barker, but I never read. Mm-hmm. It's really weird. I've had this thing for 30-something years? And This is the first time I read it.
I can go one step further. I didn't have this book until we actually bought it for me for this episode. Wow. It was something that it was hard to find out of print, of course, for decades. And for some reason, it just kind of slipped my radar, even though I knew that it existed. I had never really gotten a copy of it. And finally, because we're like, hey, let's do some more art book episodes because they were so good with the Clive Barker Imaginer. Let's do that. And I had some, like Shadows in Eden, and I have Illustrator 2, and I have the Visions of Heaven and Hell, but I never had Pandemonium. So it was really cool.
We'd been calling this an art book because when you flip through it, it does kind of look like it's an art book, but when you actually read it, it reads more like a magazine. Where it's a bunch of interviews, and the interviews are sort of formatted around sketches and photos and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of what it is. It's like a professionally printed and published fanzine or magazine.
Yeah, that's exactly what Stephen Jones, who edited Shadows in Eden, said. He says, my opinion of Pandemonium is that it is basically a glossy-looking fanzine and that they're aimed at two totally different audiences. And he goes on to say, the quality of the material of the book operates more on a fanzine level. It is something to sell to the comic stores and trade off the Barker name. That's not to say it denigrates any of the material in the book. It's basically aimed at the casual buyer. So,
definitely. Yeah. And it's and we can't overlook that it's printed by Eclipse Books, who did the comic adaptations of the Books of Blood, the Tapping the Vein and stuff. And there's kind of a big advertisement for, it's a story, but it's also an advertisement for the comics in the back.
Sure. It's got a whole section here that's nothing but explaining all the comic books that Eclipse has been putting out and the ones that are about to come out and who's going to work in them and what are they going to be about. And also, I think this came out around the time of The Great and Secret Show, right? Because there's a whole section here that just reads kind of like advertising publicity print for The Great and Secret Show.
Right, 1991. So I think The Great and Secret Show was the last book, and Imagica maybe was in the wings, but not quite out yet. And same with Thief of Always.
There's a picture of Clive Barker here, and you can see on the floor like the binders that have written Imagica for the manuscript. So he was definitely working on that. Yeah. Let's start over at the beginning, right?
Yeah. So I like it's edited by Michael Brown, but it seems like really heavily contributed by Nicholas Vince, and so it's kind of put together by in a way, it seems like a lot of friends of Clive Barker.
Yeah, and it was advising editor was Fred Burke, who went on to work on a lot of books similar to this and also comic books for like Eclipse. Fred Burke worked with Steve Niles for Illustrator 1 and maybe Illustrator 2 as well. He also worked in Hyperkind. He worked on some of those adaptations for the Eclipse graphic novel adaptations of the Books of Blood. So he was very involved in that stuff and those Eclipse books.
It opens with a quote from the Damnation game. In an earlier age, Pandemonium, the first city in hell, stood on a lava mountain with lightning, while lightning tore the clouds above and beacons burned on its walls to summon the fallen angels. So it's kind of interesting. It's in a way, it's like they're saying that this book is just a chaos, right? It's just a mishmash of different things about Clive Barker.
Sure, yeah. Pandemonium. I don't remember this quote. This is from the Damnation game?
Yeah, that's what it says on there. I don't remember it either. I mean, it's a cool quote.
What was that city from the Tortured Souls? It's Primordium, right?
Primordium. There we go.
Huh. All of a sudden, I was
Primordium has sort of a fantasy feel, like it's a city. We talked about this a little bit, that it was kind of a city out in the middle of nowhere. It almost felt like maybe it was a city in hell.
Sure. Yeah, that would make sense to me. Totally. Yeah, of course, this is kind of like a Milton quote here in the opening. It's the Pandemonium. The first city of hell is what happens when Lucifer falls into hell, and then he rises from the lake of fire with his demons, and then he creates a city of Pandemonium, which is a very beautiful, like you said, way of describing the chaos that is this book. Even though it's distributed in sections, right? It's got some definite sections here.
And then we've got, we open with Barker on Barker, so it's called Speaking from the Dark. And this is Clive Barker talking about himself and his process. And it's interesting. He kind of goes into his beginnings a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of like a Revelations interview. It actually is called Your Revelations, Barker on Barker.
Yeah.
And this picture right here, so there's a double page photo where you can see Clive Barker wearing a black T-shirt and like a silver chain around his neck with his spiky hair at the time because he was maybe like in his mid to late 30s. And he's writing what appears to be a Magica because you can look on the floor next to his chair and you see all these black binders with the word Magica written on the side.
Right. Yeah. You've held one of those.
I did. Isn't that amazing? That's nuts. And like you said, I mean, he talks a lot about genre here in this opening. He talks a lot about the horror genre influences that he had, people who might historically fall as proto precursors of the horror genre, like Christopher Marlowe, William Blake. His kind of mishmash of the fantastic and the horrible into what he called the fantastique.
Yeah.
Which was really kind of it already existed at the time, but definitely it was more popularized for people like us through Clive Barker's constant use of that word.
Right. I never heard it anywhere else, but in relation to Clive Barker and interviews with him. And I think that in general, this book really captures the feeling of what it was like to be a Clive Barker fan in the late 80s and early 90s when it seemed like, holy crap, this guy's taking over horror and I guess you would say the fantastique. And what is the deal with this guy? Where did he come from? What's his background? Let's learn more about him and what makes him tick and why is he such a Renaissance man? Yes,
and they're all profusely illustrated. All these pages with doodles and ink drawings and sumi drawings of Clive Barker's many characters and little doodles that sometimes have nothing to do with any story, but it's just stuff that he would do. And when we visited the studio, we got to see stacks and stacks of doodles like this.
Yeah. And the next part, because this first chapter, Revelations, is broken up into different stuff. And the next part is something that we actually talked to Nicholas Vince about, and we didn't even realize it's in this book. The Luggage in the Crypt interview. So right. Nicholas Vince liked doing interviews from the point of view of what would you take with you into the afterlife.
Yeah, a little bit inspired by those interviews of the bouillon de culture, which was that guy, that French cultured guy who would ask people, what would you take into what would you say to St. Peter at the gates of heaven and stuff like that. And he would do these interviews for the Skeleton Crew magazine. And in this case, he asks Clive, what would you take with you into heaven in terms of works of art, books, movies, furniture, stuff like that. And it's very very interesting. The answers that he gives. I mean, there's a list here at the end, so you can actually see.
You can summarize
works mentioned, right? Yeah. So a volume of Crazy Cat comic strips.
And I swear when we first interviewed Nicholas Vince, it would have been one of our single-digit number episodes. He talked about doing Luggage in the Crypt interviews, and I think, didn't he say he did the one with Neil Gaiman?
He might have. Yeah. I don't have the Skeleton Crew magazines, but I'm actually transcribing episode 11 with Nicholas Vince.
Yeah, I was wondering if maybe that one or it was the one before that.
I think it might have been the one before that because this is episode 11. But he definitely interviewed a lot of people, and I'm pretty sure he must have also done Neil Gaiman. But here he starts by asking, for example, about whether or not do you believe in the afterlife? And they have a funny little back and forward here about, well, it depends. What kind of stuff would I take into heaven? I mean, that depends on whether or not there's going to be a customs office in heaven saying, hey, you can't take that in here.
Yeah.
Because, of course, we're talking about artwork that might be a little, risque, more sexual. Like the angels would blush at some of the stuff that Clive would probably bring into heaven with him. But they bring up this funny fictional idea that, you know what, I probably wouldn't take any stuff like the classics because everybody else is going to bring the classics along with them. And like, why would I take the entire works of William Shakespeare? I'm sure someone in heaven already has that book there. Or you could
just go over to William Shakespeare and ask to borrow them from, or have him recite them, because he probably knows them by heart.
Yeah. But so he's talking about, carrying copies of the works of de Sade or something like that. So that there would be like this something to declare or nothing to declare, like, offices on as you enter heaven. And maybe you could try, sneak it in through the nothing to declare line and try to sneak something past it. But,
and he called those like the red block and the green block or something like that. I forget.
Channel.
Or channel.
So in terms of the books, I think he goes with Moby Dick, right? Because it's a huge book. And he says you could get a solid 2 days of reading out of that, which probably a lot more than that.
And he was hoping he'd be able to swap stuff with other people once he's in heaven so that he could also read other people's books.
So he thinks that Moby Dick, for example, is a very layered work, so that works very well for him. Which have you ever read Moby Dick? Like
no,
for
I
school,
haven't.
Or?
Yeah, I've kind of wanted to, but I haven't have not gotten around to it. I know it opens with "Call Me Ishmael."
Well, it opens with a whole bunch of like research material about whales. Actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's like I don't know what to call that section, but it's like I have a pocketbook of Moby Dick from Penguin Classics, and the opening of that is like maybe 10 to 13 pages of nothing but like research material about whales that Herman Melville chose to introduce the novel with.
Wow. So
but then of course, "Call Me Ishmael" is the most famous quoted first sentence of a novel. But it's really good. I mean, the whole character of Queequeg is just so fantastic that this guy with like these tattoos and who meditates for hours on end and nobody can disturb him until he gets up, and people are thinking, what the heck is he doing? Huh. And of course, Herman Melville, who based that book in a real life story of like these sailors who were like, they were at sea for like 14 months or something. There's a book that talks about the real life story of those sailors called "In the Heart of the Sea." I think someone made a movie out of it. These people were whalers, and they were hunting whales, and a whale actually attacked their boat and sank it. So they had to throw out a little frigate, kind of like a lifeboat thing, and they took as many provisions as they could out of the sinking ship, and then they were at sea for a long time, and ended up having to cannibalize a couple of the black sailors who were with them, which not a good story. Yeah, not a good story there. But when they found them, they were like, they had human bones on the boat, and some of them never really recovered. Another guy actually went right back into the sailing business. Crazy story though.
Wow.
In the Heart of the Sea. Go look it up. I've read that book. It's amazing. But the whale attacks the boat. So they were like killing whales, and one whale they spotted a whale. And, whatever they say, I forgot now, whale ho. And as they're trying to harpoon the whale actually, smacked the boat with the sailors with the harpoons. And not just that, but as they rescued back to the main boat, the whale actually turns around and swam really fast and rammed their boat and broke the hull. So probably one of the only stories that is registered that a whale actually sank back the whaling ship. So that kind of inspired the whole white whale that has vengefully like eats Ahab's leg, and the whole story of the Captain Ahab wanting to get revenge on Moby Dick.
Wow.
a whale that apparently had several harpoons, and even sailors strapped to the harpoons wrapped around ropes. Like whenever it broke surface, you could see the bodies of the sailors. It's a really good book. I mean, I really recommend reading Moby Dick. Not sure about the reread value of it, though, because it's such a commitment to read it once.
Yeah.
But definitely when you're a younger person, reading that book will definitely leave a big impression.
Yeah, well, I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. So, and he talks about other books like Peter Pan.
Yeah, and he's talked about Peter Pan being an influence a lot of times in a lot of interviews.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, same with Moby Dick also.
Yeah, I've never read J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan. I've only seen the Disney movie.
Same.
Which, they also go a little bit into detail about the movie and how Clive used to stand around the yard as a kid. You know, when the wind was blowing, he would close his eyes, spread his arms, and pretend that he could fly. So that's a pretty little vignette.
And he talks a little about the difference between the book and the movie, the Disney movie, because in the book, the Peter Pan and the Lost Boys kind of delighted in torturing adults and killing them.
Sure, yeah. There is that darker tone of it. And what do you think about Captain Hook and the crocodile? Is it a crocodile?
Right. Yeah.
That Captain Hook lost his hand to the crocodile, right?
Right.
A little bit like Ahab loses his leg to Moby Dick.
Right. Have you seen that movie with Robin Williams, Hook?
Oh yeah, sure. I love that movie.
Yeah, it's pretty good. And that one, they do talk about how they like killing pirates, but you don't see them actually doing it, as far as I know, as far as I can remember. Yeah.
That movie has a very kind of sad message, but also inspiring about growing up and learning how to deal with leaving behind childish things, but then also rediscovering the joy of, I think, being playful and staying young at heart, right?
Yeah.
Even though there's the scene where Captain Hook, played by Dustin Hoffman, takes out his black wig, and you see that he's bald and he's got these wispy white hairs and he's just tired.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad.
Yeah, it is a little bit.
Yeah. And then he talks about poetry. He talks about William Butler Yeats. He would take the complete works of Yeats. And he mentions a story here, which I went back and I researched on the internet, that C.S. Lewis once met Yeats in his old age and found him to be an incredibly pompous old fart. And I looked this up. I looked C.S. Lewis and Yeats, and I found an interesting report of that. It seems that C.S. Lewis got to meet William Butler Yeats through a relationship he had with a guy called Steed. And I'll put this link on the show notes.
Okay.
If people want to read the story of how C.S. Lewis ended up meeting Yeats through his friend, who got to introduce them, and you can read a little bit of what C.S. Lewis talks about how he thought of some of the things that Yeats were talking about. He doesn't call him a pompous old fart, but definitely he says that he enjoyed meeting him the second time more than the first time, for sure. So I'll put that in the show notes for whoever is interested in that.
That'll be cool. And the next part, it made me cringe a little bit. Because we've joked about this a lot, but this is called So Many Monsters, So Little Time, and it's Clive Barker's most frequently asked questions. And deliberately, I mean, it's not like they did a bad job, but deliberately they asked the most they really are the most frequently asked and questions, and it's really cringeworthy. Like, where do you get your ideas from? Is the first one in here, and you're thinking, oh my god.
It's definitely a strange feature, right? I mean, it's like they wanted to put this out and say, okay, guys, these are the questions. I'm going to ask them so nobody ever has to ask them again.
Exactly, yeah. It's like we realize that this is lame, but we're going to do it anyway just to get it out of the way.
But amazingly enough, he does end up giving very detailed and very interesting replies to some of these questions.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love the part where he's talking about Weave World and how Uriel, the Guardian of Eden, wasn't actually an angel. It just thought that it was, and he kind of goes into how he likes the idea of revisionist history, or that things aren't exactly what they seem, or maybe creatures think that they're something and they're not.
Yeah. Or this question here, did your parents get after you to do something with your life? And then he explains, about his family, and, they ask him, do you have any sisters or brothers? He talks a little bit about his brother Roy. Some of these questions, follow-up questions, are really kind of strange, though, right? I mean,
yeah.
Does your brother drive a station wagon? I guess it's a question about whether or not Roy has embraced the suburban lifestyle.
Is he some kind of a square?
Right.
Yeah.
Not that having a station wagon makes you a square.
Yeah, it's a weird question that I guess is supposed to be funny, but it just comes off awkward.
Yeah, but he talks about his godfather being a sea captain, and how he went to the Mersey River, and he would see all these ships that were coming from different parts of the world, and that's how he got inspired for Weave World. And of course we know it's not in here, but we know stuff like the Chinese puzzle boxes
right. Yeah.
were actually based on, the Hellraiser one was actually based on something that his grandfather had, right?
Yeah, well, and pertaining to Weave World, the power of an heirloom like object passed down through the family,
Of course, yeah. And then which one do you prefer, writing books or making movies?
Yeah.
And this was actually asked during the time when he was working on Nightbreed, so his answer is very. It reflects the frustration that he was going through. He even says, "You're asking me at a time when I've just been on the road 5 weeks, and during that time, never felt more powerless in relation to a project in my life than I feel watching 20th Century Fox lose the movie Nightbreed for me. That certainly made me reappraise the process of movie making. I don't know anybody in Hollywood who hasn't had that happen. It's like a cliche about the way Hollywood treats people, but that doesn't make it any less painful."
Yeah, and this was a really interesting answer to me, because there was a long time when everybody was blaming Morgan Creek and kind of forgot that 20th Century Fox was heavily involved in this movie too, as I guess the distributor, right?
Right.
Yeah, and so 20th Century Fox kind of said, like, hey, we don't get this movie, you better get somebody in here to edit it. So, or was it like, we've got our own guy, was it Mark Goldblatt? I forget who it was that made the decision to hire a different editor. But that, it was more 20th Century Fox kind of throwing their weight around and thinking they knew better how to make this movie.
Right, and probably also the producers like James Robinson and people like that. But did I hear a cat meow in the background?
No, it was I have a standing desk, and something caused the button to get pushed, and my desk started going up in the air.
So it was the little engine? Oh, that's cool. I love those desks. Michael Brown, who came up with some of these questions, what did you think of the interviews? I'll give my opinion afterwards. But what did you think of like the questions and how he asks them and what he focuses on?
I think that these are hokey questions that he's been asked a million times, which was the point. But I think that Clive Barker did a great job coming up with interesting answers to these, like, what do your parents think, and what I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I some of the follow-up questions to the main questions were also a little bit kind of not very deep, I guess you would say.
Sure. I think I share a little bit the same ideas that you have about them. I would have preferred if he had been a little more in-depth in some of these questions, or have gone into I wouldn't want him to do like a super in-depth interview, start when you were born and then when you're working on your last novel. But I would have liked to see him get a little more in-depth and partition certain areas of more chronological questions about stuff that we might not know as fans, because this was basically a book for fans. And he focused on
brand new fans, I think.
Yeah. And he focused a little bit in certain questions that I thought, I wouldn't call them tasteless, but I would call them like awkward. Like he asks here, has becoming rich changed your life?
Yeah.
And then in the Peter Atkins interview afterwards, he asks Peter Atkins, do you think that Clive Barker changed after becoming a millionaire? And then he focuses on being a millionaire, about Peter Atkins having been a millionaire for a while.
Yeah,
and I thought that's kind of a strange, awkward, thing to focus on. Personally, just,
Yeah, I agree. I think that I felt like a little embarrassed reading those questions.
And in the interviews that Michael Brown did with other people that were not Clive Barker, I felt like he was just asking them about what is Clive Barker like, or what does Clive Barker do, and how did you meet Clive Barker? And it kind of focuses so much on their relationship to Clive Barker, where I would have liked to seen him focus a little more on the actual interview. You know what I'm saying?
It's sort of, I totally know what you're saying, because it's sort of a lack of awareness of, that I'm not saying that we're perfect, but we've been doing this for 10 years, or we're on our 10th year now. And we're very cognizant that, yes, this is called the Clive Barker podcast, but these are people that we're talking to have their own stuff going on, and they are not a cast off of Clive Barker, right? They're their own people. They have their own projects and their own things that they're working on, their own thoughts and feelings. And yes, we talk a little bit about, what was it like to work with Clive Barker, but we also go into depth on, we're interested to see what things that they're doing and there are other experiences besides just in relation, as something orbiting around Clive Barker, like he's the sun.
Yeah. So, I'm not trying to, I don't know how old Michael Brown was when he was doing these interviews. I don't know exactly who he is.
That's a good point, too. I mean, he's probably was younger than we are now, so.
Yeah. And I know that you're doing a book about Clive Barker, so you tend to focus a little bit on that. But it's just, for example, the Peter Atkins interview, I just felt he could have focused a little more on Peter Atkins. Yeah. And he kind of does, like near the end and past the middle. He kind of focuses a little more on his experience of writing scripts for Hellraiser and stuff that he did. But some of the first initial questions seem like too focused on Clive Barker. It's like me spending the afternoon asking Nicholas Vince about what it was like working with Clive Barker and where did you meet Clive Barker and how was doing theater with Clive Barker and what did Clive Barker write and what did you think about his work? Yeah. And it's like I wouldn't ask him all those questions because I think, that kind of, but there's definitely a lot of interesting stuff in these interviews. That's just something that I wanted to get out of the way in the sense that the next section, for example, is the Peter, not the next section, but the one after that.
The next major chapter, yeah.
Yeah. The next section is A Thing Untrue.
Right.
And it's Clive Barker talking basically about Nightbreed, right?
Yeah. Yeah, right. He's talking about Nightbreed, and I think he's talking about fiction in general and monsters, the nature of monsters. Yeah. And I have to bring this up. I think that Clive brings up these fake quotes that he created for Nightbreed. Yeah, but he didn't reveal that they were fake.
Right. But he opens this one with Jan de Moy, a Dutch surrealist poet, and he talks about a book that he wrote about monsters, and it says, and then after that quote, which is you can find that in Nightbreed Chronicles, the book by Murray Close Photography and Stephen Jones edited it. He says, books. That confession, along with a number of others, cost de Moy dearly. In 1932, a few weeks after penning the words above, he was executed for sedition, and his body was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere along the shores of Italy's Lake Como. Complete fabrication. I don't think Jan de Moy exists, right? I mean, I've looked it up for years, and I'm like, okay, this is like fake. Like, this is part of the story.
It's cool. It's cool to see this little slice in time when Cabal was only out for a couple of years, right? So he was continuing he'd never admitted that those were fake quotes, and so now he's got a whole fake biography of this quote person,
Right. Yeah. And I think that's not the only one. I think, for example, this ends with another quote from a guy called Agai Escapa. And it says, it was Gaius Kappa in the final paragraph of what many consider to be the seminal work on monsters, The Divided Eye, who after listing every conceivable type of creature went on to say, I meet at dawn the nemesis of those I have named, and am haunted by it all my waking hours, excepting those when drink or ecstasy drives it from me. I mean, of course, consciousness of self, which forbids both the monstrous genius and the monstrous foolishness, which patrols at the limits of my civility and wags its finger at excess, which says it knows beauty and will not be persuaded that my loins know better. I will kill it one day, and if that killing is self-murder, then amen to that. He died in 73 at the age of 101. He's reported to have greatly enjoyed going naked at his advanced age, saying he was at least looking fit to join the other tribe. And then he says, the above may be untrue. So that's the only thing at the end where he gives it up. But it's like, he made up these things, right?
And the title of this whole article is A Thing Untrue. So that's also another little sort of Easter egg or hint in there.
I know.
And we only know better because this was 30 plus years ago, and since then we've learned that those are all fake quotes in Cabal.
Exactly.
But I took it all at face value when I first read Cabal, back in like 90 I think it was 1990.
Yeah, when we didn't have the internet to go Google it up and see if we could find this book.
Yeah.
Another Matter or Man Remade. I mean, at the time, I think I kind of figured out that these were fake things just because of the romantic way that he would write these. This poet wrote this book, and then I shall meet Saul and I shall go see him, and then he committed suicide. And I was like, that looks like it's a romantic kind of like fabrication. Yeah. But I wasn't sure until much later when I was like, yeah, that's pretty much fake.
Yeah.
But a beautiful, this is a beautiful section because the way he talks about the Nightbreed, the way he talks about the parade of monsters in the Nightbreed, and it
echoes the sentiments of that opening introduction to Nightbreed that you see sometimes, where Clive Barker is presenting his intention for the movie before you actually see what the final results of the movie are. Which is cool, and that whole thing is what made me fall in love with Nightbreed and his writing in general. All of his works was seeing that dedication to something that was flawed, but he wanted to say, look, this is my feeling about monsters and about fiction and our fascination with horror.
Right. On one of the pages of this article, you can see the black and white ink drawing of what was supposed to become later the painting that Clive did for the Books of Blood cover. So you see Volume 1, The Highway.
Yeah.
So you see all the dead. One of them's lighting candles out of his fingers in the Hand of Glory.
One of them is like hopping along in a casket in there.
Yeah, back there. He's bound with his shroud, wrapped in his shroud, and he's just being propped up in a little casket.
Yeah.
You have someone who's just a big eye, kind of a cyclops creature, and beautiful stuff. There's even kind of a fish-faced looking monster. So they're not all human, but gorgeous stuff just in black and white. The way that he can create such a richness of background and richness of characters. And of course, as we go from the foreground to the background, you see these faces becoming more and more, just hints of faces. Like they become just a circle with two dots, a nose, and a slash for a face. And then in the background, you see that they're basically just shadows. They're just smudges of paint made to look like silhouettes.
Yeah.
But it works.
It gives a really good depth.
Yeah, it's just so beautiful. And then, of course, on the other page, we see this creature who's half fly, half man. It's got the body of a fly, the wings of a fly, and then a big round head of like a fetus.
I
with
thought
an old
that was
face.
Baphomet.
Is it?
Well, maybe not then. Yeah, maybe I was just wrong.
Yeah, I think Baphomet appears in a different sketch later in the book.
But he looks kind of similar to that.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is a beautiful introduction here, A Thing Untrue. He has a particular line that I just want to say. He says, liberated from the constraints of classicism, the unjaundiced eye may greet the sight of the monster much as it greets a thing of beauty, with awe, fascination, and a little envy. Our sensibilities may take pleasure in its multifarious surfaces. Monsters are often walking hymns to fetishism. No small bliss. Where else can flesh grow fur and feathers sprout on bare backs? In Cabal, the book in which the Nightbreed first showed their faces, I quote Chaz Kidd, who seemed to put the point well. Out on the town with two skins, the leather and the flesh. Yeah. 3 if you count the 4, right. The foreskin.
Yeah, it's kind
all
of
out to be touched tonight, yes sir. All ready to be rubbed and nuzzled and loved tonight, yes sir. So that's another great fake quote.
Yeah.
From obviously a leather fetishist, Chaz Kidd.
Yeah.
And the big that huge quote that I've mentioned in so many episodes comes from this intro, which is appetite marks the monster as celibacy does the nun.
Right. Yeah.
Which the big reflection of the monster as a creature of appetite from some images, like he mentions here in the Luggage from the Crypt interview, that he would take with him into the afterlife a drawing by Blake called the Head of the Ghost of a Flea. And right. If you see the painting, The Ghost of a Flea, William Blake described that as the representation of this thirst, right? This soul of this man who would be reborn as a flea to represent his thirst in life for whatever it may be, but it becomes a thirst for blood as a flea. And he represents the ghost of the flea is actually a gigantic looking humanoid figure that's almost like reptilian / insect. It's got like a serpent's tongue kind of coming out. But yeah, that's completely a creature of appetite, in this case, thirst, but it's kind of the same principle. So it's a reflection of the monstrous is just this absolute need, or this want, not so much need, but this want of something, right?
He also brings up this problematic sort of formula with monsters is that in our stories, first we show them and their appetites and maybe we sort of fetishize them or worship them, but in the end they always have to be like, brought down, take them down a peg, kill them, banish them.
Sure.
And even Nightbreed, it even happens in Nightbreed. Even after we've been made to sympathize with the monsters, we're still like, yeah, but, gotta still destroyed their homes anyway and sent them scattered out into the night.
And I think a little bit because sometimes they reflect exaggerated, broken mirror reflections of things that we do as humans. Yeah. And things that we can't control in ourselves. And so we hate to see them represented as a monster because it's showing us the mirror of our deepest, faults. And when I wanted to say, I just want to clear up, when I said that the monster probably has wants, not needs, I mean that because saying that a monster has needs kind of makes it sound more natural sounding. Like, oh, you need to eat, you need to drink. That's true. But the vampire wants blood, right? I mean, it also needs it, but mostly he wants it because
it depends. I mean, does he really need it? He's dead, right? So it depends on who you ask, I suppose.
It's a want that lives beyond death, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's more of an obsession, right? A compulsion. The ghost wants to haunt the living. The ghost doesn't need to haunt the living. The ghost needs peace. Just like the monster, wants to inflict violence for no reason because there's no reason for a monster in a movie. Why does Jason wants to kill the teenagers? Right. It's just because that's what he does. He wants revenge, right? He wants revenge.
He wants revenge at first, but then he's like, hey, I kind of like doing this. And he just wants to keep killing and killing and killing more and more.
Right. It becomes a compulsion.
Random people.
Yeah. Just like Freddy Krueger, he didn't need to, molest kids, but he wanted to, and then he wants to take revenge on the parents and all that stuff. The next section is co-conspirators, which is the interview with Peter Atkins, right?
Yeah. So, and it's the first part is an interview with Peter Atkins, and the second part is an interview with Alan Plent, who was Clive Barker's art teacher in like
oh yeah, that's
would
so
be the
good.
equivalent of junior high that we have here.
Right. That's great that they got a hold of that person from Clive's past.
Yeah.
I always love to see, people from someone's history as they were becoming artists and being able to talk about what they were like. And sometimes there are people who helped direct these people to the right path, right? I mean, they also talk about Dr. Russell, which was probably Clive's English teacher, I think. So those are people who are, very important in the formative years. But it seems like Plent, the art teacher, found Clive's artistic sensibilities almost completely formed already at the time.
Yeah, and so his job, he felt, was to teach him technique, rather than teaching him how, an eye for color, or especially didn't have to teach him imagination.
Right.
Which he said a lot of other students would do. He called them comics, right? Or I think he called them comics. Yeah.
Clive even would draw these comics and give it to him to read, and he would be actually surprised at some of these some of the sensibilities that Clive would imbue in these things, especially like sexuality, for example. Of course, we know that that's a big part of Clive's art. Is that he creates these characters who are very sensual and very anatomically correct, I would say.
Yeah. One interesting thing that he said in here that I was surprised to read was that he didn't feel like Clive Barker's art style was authentic or was like original. Is better way to say it. Which I guess you had to have been him and be at that time, because we weren't there. But I don't see it now, I guess you could say.
Oh, okay. He says, I'd always thought that his work wasn't original, but it was an original way of looking at traditional comics.
He says that a couple of times in the interview, that it's kind of like his art style wasn't, he was really imaginative and his subject matter was very original, but his art style wasn't. Which is, I guess we don't really have any drawings or sketches from that time.
That's an interesting way of thinking about it, because after he says that, they also ask him, what were his influences, Clive's influences? And he says, it's very hard to say. And quite honestly, I don't think Clive actually knows himself, because without sounding rude, his own family was very much middle class, living in a Liverpool suburb. So, I mean, to say something doesn't strike him very original, but then say that he's not sure what the influences were.
Right, yeah, and he was trying to dig further into that comment, and it's like he came out with no answers. Right.
I mean, definitely the art that Clive did in some of these sketches illustrating the pages, some of them look a little comic booky. They do, in terms of anatomy and construction.
But
the characters themselves,
some are really complicated, and some are like single lines.
Yeah, some are like single lines, which I could see like 70s art kind of look like this. Yeah. You can go back to definitely some of the influences are listed in the Imaginer books, right? Mm-hmm. They talk about the drawings of Jean Genet and stuff like that, especially the ink drawings. So, yeah, I guess this was kind of like informing like Clive's style at the time, but definitely. With age, Clive definitely crystallized into his own style and his own use of lines and colors, especially because there's a part here where Michael Brown asks him, did his work attract a lot of attention from pupils and other teachers? And he says, oh, yes. And when I come to think of it, he did have a sense of dramatic color, which I would have liked to have stolen from him for your own work. Yeah. It was a sort of dramatic color which came with the horror. He would put a fiery red background behind a dinosaur's head, and it worked beautifully. And, of course, now looking at the Imaginer books, we see how color was so important to Clive, and he talks so much about the importance of the use of color to convey emotion. And his paintings are so like layered with impasto and so much color.
Right. So it seems like he's not really doing a good job backing up this idea that his art style wasn't original.
Right. Yeah. But if we could just go back a little bit to the Raising Hell with Peter Atkins.
Yeah.
there's just some of that interview. I think he focuses a little too much on Peter's relationship with Clive, but then there's all this great stuff like this artwork illustrating this page, a sketch of Pete Atkins as Pierrot from A Clown Saddam. Yeah. And you see this profile, very stylized picture of Peter Atkins playing this guitar that at the same time it's almost like a leg. And it's just such a beautiful drawing in ink.
Yeah, that sketch says it's a sketch of Pete Atkins as Pierrot from A Clown Sodom.
Yeah, I see that.
Oops.
But yeah, so they talk about what was it like to grow up and in Liverpool with Clive Barker, and they talk a little bit about music. He says that he doesn't like the Beatles that much, but it's there's some stuff in here that's really, really interesting. I would recommend people buying this to read the interview. But they talk about it again, the importance of being the Mersey, and roaming around as kids, derelict docks. When the Mersey stopped having all those boats that would go, to all sorts of ports around. Of course, that stuff eventually ended, and you got all these derelict docks, which you remember like Kirsty walking around the docks in London, kind of has this reflection. So I found myself seeing a lot of stuff in these interviews, and sometimes a flash of it would appear from Clive Barker's work. And I'd be like, I wonder how much this stuff that they're saying is the origin of this stuff being in this book or this movie.
One of my favorite parts was hearing him reflect on Weave World and going, "Oh, I know exactly what house that is, what street that is," and even though he's given fictional names, to the streets and stuff and the landmarks.
I'm sure there's some sort of architecture in his mind of exactly where that would be and how that would look like.
Yeah.
There's a drawing here that a 21-year-old Clive Barker gave to Peter Atkins on his 18th birthday, which is so complicated, but so amazing. It's so surreal. It's got these human figures and torsos and these heads inside what looks like a mishmash of broken glass and these star-like forms and smoke and flames. It's just such an amazing drawing. It's on page 33 of the book.
Yeah. I'm looking at it. It's amazing, and that's why it's a little bit hard to pin down his style because it changes so much.
Right.
Depending on the subject and the day and
the culture of the time and the aesthetic of the time, I guess. Mm-hmm. They talk a lot about the dog company. They talk a lot about the plays that they did. And they go into halfway through the interview, they start talking more about what it was like for Peter Atkins to grow in Liverpool, which was very interesting because I focused on that too when I was when we were interviewing Pete, and I was like, I want to talk to him about growing up in Liverpool because it's something sometimes people just gloss over and they just go like, what was it like to write Hellraiser 2? And so it's like he had like 30 years before that, And there's a beautiful picture here of Clive Barker accepting the British Horror and Fantasy Award on page 37. And he looks like he's wearing a velvet jacket with like a vest and a big collared shirt.
Yeah.
Which looks a little dated now when you look at it. But,
it looks like... and there was an interview in here, and I forget which one, where Clive was saying that he likes fancier clothes now. Compared to when I think it was that question about what was it like growing up poor or being on the dole or something. He said something like that, and Clive said, well,
it was boring.
Yeah. And he likes wearing some fancier clothes, but it's not always the case. I mean, I think he just did sometimes, it's like, you'll still see him coming to public events with paint all over his clothes. And
I think that involves a whole different image that he's trying to convey. But going back to what you were saying about, growing up in Liverpool and all that, and how that might have informed certain stories and streets that are in certain stories that could be Peter Atkins says here that in Weaveworld, for example, Cal Mooney.
Yeah.
He's in Liverpool at the beginning of the story, and it says, Cal lived and grew in sections of Liverpool, which, although Clive is careful not to mention, I recognize. I know the streets that run down the train line that a couple of scenes happen in. I know the street where Cal lives. I know the street Susanna's grandmother lived on. Mm-hmm. And, and any writer worth his salt can draw you into the geography of the story. But there was an added bonus of being able to populate those streets with my own memories and my own physical knowledge of them. And this is going to sound weird, but like when I was reading like Weaveworld, I did try at the time to get a map of Liverpool to see if the streets that he was mentioning, that if I could find them and find out an idea of what the city looked like. That was the kind of level that I wanted to take the story to. I did try to find that. And I did find a little tiny map of Liverpool because, when did I read Weaveworld? Maybe 95, 96 maybe, around the time where I bought the Weaveworld. And yeah, it was too small of a map to actually find any of those streets. And now I probably know some of those streets probably didn't even exist. They were just made up streets. But I did try to find that because that's the kind of thing that I, try to come up with when I'm reading a book. I try to go back and see, is this real? Is this true? Can I figure out exactly, that I'm trying to remember when I was reading the Scarlet Gospels and they were talking about the triangle in Brooklyn. And I was going to Google Maps trying to figure out, what the streets they were mentioning on when Harry the Moor finds the demons and they kill his partner. I was trying to find out where those streets were and what area of New York he was on. Oh, yeah. To try to find the triangle. So yeah, that's interesting that sometimes, you can, but I don't have the experience of living there. So that's the thing.
There was something also at the end. I think it was at the end of the interview that Pete was talking about, and this may not be what I was thinking of, but one thing was he was talking about how he was working on another script for Hellraiser 3,
right near the end.
Yeah, which we kind of know, and he's like, hopefully I'll get to work with Tony Randall again. And, and it's like, I know. Wish that would have been. Yeah.
Yeah, it ended up being, James Hickox, who did Hellraiser 3, and who knows what it would have been like. Probably very similar.
A lot more similar to Hellraiser 2, right?
Well, the script was, you can't get away from the script. I mean, it depends on what the director would have made the movie look like.
Well,
what sort of music they would have used.
But there were how many different versions of Hellraiser 3? Like 4 or 5. Completely different scripts for Hellraiser 3.
Right. I mean, I don't know. Well, he does mention that he was on a third draft of Hell on Earth. I mean, he's not talking about the one where Pinhead resurrects from a brothel, from a vat.
Hell on Earth is the one that we saw. And the other ones probably would have had different subtitles.
But it definitely would have been different in terms of a movie, depending on the director. I mean, it's not, the movie doesn't start and end with a script. I mean, the way that they make the movie, and definitely the music that they use. But at the same time, I think if they hadn't made the movie so rock and roll and so like mainstream, it may not have grown the audience as much as it did, because Hellraiser 3, I think, really grew the audience of Hellraiser franchise. I mean, it was like the movie that really blew it up. Hellraiser 4, not so much. Hellraiser 4, unfortunately, was kind of on the decline. But Hellraiser 1 was great. Hellraiser 2, again, trying to make lightning hit twice. And it doesn't so much hit twice, but it kind of like falls on the same field. And then Hellraiser 3 is just the forest fire, right? I mean, it's just a forest fire. And I think that it really made Pinhead was everywhere, and Motorhead and Hellraiser and all that stuff. I mean, that was great.
And Hellraiser 4 is them trying to take if to stretch the metaphor out, would be them taking the ashes and trying to shove it together into a discernible shape.
Hellraiser 4 to me is like the leftovers in the fridge, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
You're still going to eat them. They're still going to taste good. But it's not like having the freshly cooked plate in front of you. And unfortunately, because of the budget thing and because of the whole interference that they did, it just totally and I hope Peter Atkins isn't listening to this.
The director walking off on the film, you know.
Exactly, yeah. It was just such a big mess. And, you know, it just felt like, okay, these are the fridge leftovers that we're going to heat up in the microwave and eat.
And this is coming from, you know, the two of us who like that movie. I mean, and especially when you look at it in comparison to the movies that followed. I mean, it's orders of magnitude better than all the direct-to-video sequels. Yeah. In
terms of story and script, it's still like having a nice juicy steak, but it's a nice juicy steak with sides that you put in the fridge overnight. So it's not going to be the same as, you know, someone just made it.
Yeah, that's a little bit sad to think about. But there was one I remembered now what this thing that was that I wanted to ask you about. So he says here one fairly long novella called The Vampires of Summer, and it was basically a result of having read that Clive offered. Okay, so he's talking about The Vampires of Summer, right? But then if you go like another paragraph down, he says, and I have just finished my first novel, Morning Star. So I'm confused. I thought The Vampires of Summer and Morning Star were the same book.
So Morning Star is subtitled The Vampires of Summer. So what I'm thinking is that probably he reworked The Vampires of Summer, and that's when it became the novel Morning Star.
Well, because he talked about he talks about them being published in separate timelines. One fairly long novella called The Vampires of Summer.
Yeah, maybe he said he had been working as a writer for a year, you know, and working on the novella called The Vampires of Summer, but now his agent was trying to sell the first novel, Morning Star. So it feels – so what I think the confusion here is that Morning Star is also subtitled The Vampires of Summer.
Yeah.
And I think that what happened was he wrote a shorter story first, the novella, and then he probably worked on it some more, and he ended up making Morning Star. Okay. That's probably how it happened. Only Peter can know for sure. So maybe we
probably other people that know his work a little better might know as well. It's just I'm just now starting. You know, I just read Morning Star, and now I want to start getting into his work more.
Oh absolutely. That and then Big Thunder. Yeah, go read Big Thunder. It's really good.
Right, that'll be next.
Yeah.
So and we talked about the interview with Alan Plent already.
Right.
Yeah, which was interesting. Actually, probably one of the more interesting parts in this book because it's not something that you really get anywhere else.
There's a funny anecdote here. When Michael Brown asks him, and his work, Clive's work, even then had a real leaning towards the fantastique, and Mr. Plent says, always, in all caps, in everything he did. He hated the mundane. The only time Clive was cruel to anybody illustrates it. There was a boy, I won't call him goody-goody, but he turned up every day in an immaculate uniform and did all his homework as he was asked to do, and Clive provoked and mocked him. I don't suppose Clive even remembers, but I was so surprised myself because Clive was a very nice young man. So it seems like Clive might have done this just out of like this, I wouldn't call it malice, but just because he was kind of rebelling against this mundane, clean-cut, neatly pressed uniform, does his homework every day, and probably Clive was like, fuck that guy.
Yeah. Well, and it's tough when you're a teenager. You feel like you're right, and everybody else needs to see things the way you see things. And yeah, and I think it takes growing up to realize that there's a lot of different ways of seeing the world and being.
And there's this beautiful question that they ask him: would you call Clive a Renaissance man? And Professor Plent says his gifts form a perfect triangle. At the top, you have this razzmatazz, his public image. And in the two corners, there's his art and his writing. Now, the triangle is solid, and no matter which way you turn it, you'll always see something. And that something is a solid part of him. I think that's perfect.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much now where he doesn't do as many public appearances or interviews, but definitely his art, his painting, two sides of that solid triangle. And, of course, his eloquence, his charm, his public persona, up to the point before he got more sick and had to recover. Definitely, people would go and he would charm them at the meetings with the fans and stuff, right? I mean, he would make drawings for them and talk to them and be super nice.
And there's been a little more, as things come out, like the Books of Blood Hulu movie, then his public appearances picked up. And I assume, that if Candyman had come out around the time that it was originally supposed to, that there would have been a lot more, around that as well. Plus Nia DaCosta and maybe Jordan Peele.
Right.
But yeah, I think that it's directly correlated to the number of releases, movies and books and things like that have slowed down, in the past 20 years, I guess you would say.
Sure, yeah. And I want to bring up another one of these moments where I looked at a doodle that Clive did probably in the 80s or the 70s, and then I was like, that looks like something out of Abarat decades later. If you go to page 47 on the book, there's this doodle of a man. He's got a fake nose and a fake chin.
Oh, yeah, right. Lehman Vole, right?
Lehman Vole, right?
Holy crap. I didn't even focus in on this picture. I didn't notice that.
It just totally reminds me of that. And I'm like, I wonder how this image is this kind of like almost like this image bouncing around in Clive's mind, and then eventually he recycled it, or it was there, or maybe it popped out of what Clive probably thought. Maybe he thought he came up with it again, and then he just drew Lehman Vole, the creature with the fake nose and the bugs that walk around his scalp and stuff that are his pets. Like, totally looks like this. The painting in the Abarat totally looks like a finished version of this drawing. Yeah. So I wonder how much this was consciously or unconsciously a throwback to this idea, this art piece that is bouncing around Clive's mind. These little doodles.
That's a good find.
A little fish being fished out of the sea of inspiration.
And then our next chapter, Theater of Pain, is just about the films, which, and it's the films only up through Nightbreed, and it talks about Salome and the Forbidden, and Transmutations and Rawhead Rex and Hellraiser and Hellbound and Nightbreed.
Yeah, very beautifully mounted as the pages look, because they have like these splash two-page pictures of each movie.
Yeah, and then only a little blurb about them, like what you would see on the back of a VHS box.
Right. Yeah. Some images I've never seen before, especially here for the one that opens a chapter. It's Clive Barker and Narcisse.
Yeah.
And this beautiful image of Clive giving Narcisse some direction on stage. And it looks like Clive's hand has a butcher's chainmail glove.
Oh, yeah, his right hand there.
Yeah, which seems to imply that some of the scenes of Decker's hand with a chainmail glove might have been Clive's. I think this is the scene where Narcisse gets his head cut off, or Decker's hand is supposed to show up on screen and cut his head off.
Oh.
That's what it looks like this photo might have been from.
Wow.
Because when you look closer at those things, you get little details that Clive's hand with a chainmail glove, just like Decker.
Yeah, right? I didn't notice that glove at all until you just brought that up. That's really interesting.
In The Forbidden, we have this picture of Pete Atkins bandaged up. He looks almost like a mummy.
Yeah.
But I think this is in one of those sections where he's being tattooed by the angels or skinned by the angels. Might have been something completely unrelated to those
because that was filmed in the negative, and then they were peeling those bandages off, and it looked like they were peeling off his skin. Right.
Well, that was layers of paint that had been painted on him inside. But this might have been from some shot that they never even included, because that movie had all sorts of things. But that looks pretty cool. And then Transmutations, you see a picture. It looks like Clive on set, and he looks so miserable in this picture.
Okay, yeah, up above the title there.
It looks kind of sad. Like,
yeah,
hey, they let me on the stage.
He's like, oh, what have I done?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What have I signed myself on for?
Yeah, and there's this guy, Underground Dweller, coming out of the ground in transmutations.
Yeah.
And it's just this guy with this leathery-looking mask.
Yeah,
I wish they had used for the double-page splash the other picture that has all the cast members in it.
Yeah, that would have been better. That one that's below the blurb there.
Yeah, they have a small picture of the entire cast with, what was the name of the girl?
Nicole,
thank you.
Oh,
and all
Nicole.
the freaks around her.
Yeah.
And then they just chose this one picture of a guy climbing out of a manhole.
Yeah,
which
to do the double-page splash, which is kind of really underwhelming to look at.
Yeah. And then, of course, Warhead Rex.
Yeah.
And the teaser poster for Hellraiser, which is very kind of rare. It doesn't show up a lot of places, but here it is.
Oh yeah, there are no limits with the skin
Frank
man
the
like
Monster.
looking through the door. Yeah.
Yeah, it says here, sketch by Barker, used as an early promotional poster for Hellraiser.
I have a framed version of that.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
With the red and black?
Yeah, signed by Ashley Lawrence.
Wow, where did you get that one?
I think...
Was it from one of those tin sets?
No, I think that one was from actually one of the Cenobite tables at a convention.
Oh, sweet. Yeah. There's a cool picture of Larry holding the switchblade with the light coming out of the stucco wall behind him. That's really gorgeous.
Oh, yeah.
And on the Hellbound, they chose this double spread page photo. You have Tony Randall, Jeff Portas, and I'm going to say this is Kenneth Cranham, maybe? Yeah,
yes,
it is.
Yeah.
As Chenard. And it looks like Jeff is like brushing some goop onto the makeup.
Yeah.
And Tony Randall is like has his hand up like, okay, I want you to put more stuff here, make this shinier, blah, blah, blah. It's like they're just brushing away.
And it's interesting here that they're including Hellraiser 2, and I suppose Candyman was not wasn't close enough to. I mean, maybe nobody even knew about it at this point.
Yeah. Candyman came out in like 94, 93?
No, I think it was
92.
92 or okay.
Right, 92. Yeah. And then the Nightbreed picture has Clive putting on some dirt and grime onto the face of
Ashbury.
Charles Hayde. Charles Hayde's character.
Yeah. Oh, geez, why did I called him Ashbury? That's Eigerman.
Lieutenant Eigerman. Thank you.
For some reason, I was picturing him. I knew exactly who I was thinking of, and I said Ashbury.
Morgan Creek Production. Well. And then we have these little drawings, right? Drawing concept art, because of course Nightbreed was the movie he had just finished, and you have this cool concept art of Decker, Boone. You got Kinski there. You got Ashbury.
Yeah.
Got these cool black and white pictures of it. And here's the page on page 70. You see the pre-production sketch of Baphomet.
Yeah.
That you were talking about.
Right.
Where all the parts are kind of floating around like connected by tendrils.
Yeah.
And there's a James Henry, John Henry. I forgot the name of the character of the actor who played Baphomet.
Yeah.
And Jeff Portas doing some lip retouching with a brush around Baphomet's mouth. Amazing photos.
Then we go into Nightbreed being the last Clive Barker movie, as at the printing time of this book. So then we go into the flaying the Cenobites, which they don't make a lot of in here. It's really interesting that it's Nicholas Vince, who was the Chatterer, conducting these interviews, and they don't really mention that. I mean, it's like Nicholas Vince, when he's doing these interviews, doesn't mention anything like, hey, you're my friend, I worked with you on this movie, none of that stuff. It's all done as if he was on the outside, looking in.
Sure. I mean, I think that when you're an interviewer, you tend to erase yourself a little bit. Maybe you can bring in your experience of certain things into the conversation.
Even to the extent he does that. He erases himself even to the extent that the questions that he poses to Doug Bradley, he frames them. He doesn't quote himself, right? He says, and so, he goes on to say, and so does he do this? Or, it's like he's talking to the audience with his questions instead of to the interviewee. Right.
Yeah. He's trying to make the article a more interesting experience for like a magazine article, right?
Right.
So he's describing a little bit what it was like. He's describing the furniture and the fact that Doug Bradley comes to the door and pretends to be his own butler.
Yeah.
And but there's some interesting moments here, like for example, and you need to remember also, Nicholas Vince wasn't a part of some of this stuff that they're talking.
No, and he wasn't in the dog
company or anything like that. So that makes sense that in those sections at least, it makes more sense that he doesn't, bring up anything from their shared past.
Right.
But yeah, again, it's one of those interviews very focused on what was it like, to go to school with Clive, and was he still living with his folks, and what was it like for Doug Bradley himself to confront his parents and let them know that he did not want to be, a banker or whatever they wanted him to be. He's I want to be an actor.
And that he was going to drop out of college.
Yeah, it's a big deal for a parent to hear a son say that, and it's a big source of conflict. And he says here, it ended up with me running out of the house because things got pretty bad. So I don't think it went very well for Doug. But look at Doug now. I mean, he did it. He had a great career.
And so one really interesting takeaway here, and we've been doing this podcast we're on our 10th year, like I said before. I had no idea that Doug and Lynn had a son.
Oh, yeah, he's got a couple of kids.
Oh, really?
Right, yeah. I think he has 2 kids, a son and a daughter, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, and that just comes from the fact that we've never had him on the show.
Right. And then now, eventually they separated, and he moved to the U.S., and now he's with Stephanie.
Yeah.
So, but they talk about interesting things that they mention here, is that we get to hear about stuff that Doug did after the dog company broke up in '82, and in between those 4 years before he became Pinhead, that he and Oliver Parker ended up doing more theater. So he talks about some of the plays that they did and stuff. So that was interesting to know what he was doing around those years.
Yeah, right. That's something that we don't read about in that much because we've been mainly following Clive Barker. So I like to read that stuff. There was a time when he was doing other stuff, like a whole year between Dog Company and watching Clive making movies and stuff, and seeing he was doing Rawhead Rex, and then all of a sudden Hellraiser came up.
Right.
And then he thought, oh yeah, it worked out great because then I'd be doing a movie with Clive, and then in the summer, touring with this theater company, and so he thought he'd be having that same sort of thing every year, which didn't quite work out. I mean, he had Hellraiser and then Nightbreed and Hellbound. Kind of, those two were in about the same year. Right.
But I mean, I hope one day we can get to Doug Bradley and have him on the podcast. That would be terrific. To bring up a lot of stuff about this and other movies that he's been in. He's been in other movies. He's been in the Wrong Turn movies. He's been a late.
I've never seen those. Is it just is it about an evil hitchhiker?
No, it's about this family of. I myself have not seen many of those Wrong Turn movies, but it's I think about a family of killers on the road somewhere in a place. I need to watch those movies. I've just seen, honestly, if I'm going to be completely truthful, I've just seen bits of some of those movies where Doug Bradley was in, because I was flipping the channel. I was like, hey, it's Doug Bradley. And I watched a little bit of that. And I know that there's some teenagers being killed left and right, and there's a family, and Doug Bradley is a member of that family. So I'm not completely familiar with those. But being able to bring Doug Bradley onto the show would be a great excuse for us to go and check out those movies.
Yeah, totally. horror movies that don't have monsters in them, unless I have a really strong reason, I have not, I usually don't watch them.
Yeah. There's a funny anecdote here about Russell, a fox. So it says here, Nicholas says, then I hit him with a question I knew he wasn't expecting. I wanted to know about Russell. He wanted to know how I knew about Russell.
Yeah.
I knew he didn't need to know how I knew. He talked. And says, this began at the first house we shared together, which was, I'm assuming, 3 up, 3 down terrace house in Litterdale Road off Smithdown Road in Liverpool. There was a fox fur, which I think belonged to Clive's grandmother or something like that. Clive named the fox fur Russell. Clive is brilliant at puppeting. He missed a superb career as a puppeteer. He's brilliant at animating things, but soon as he starts to do it, they always assume this offensive, malicious personality, and Russell was no exception. He used to appear around doors, particularly when the girls had gone to bed, and start going, "Oh, hello, darling," doing that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I would kill to watch that happen. That sounds so funny.
Yeah, like, when I was reading this article or this interview, I was like, "Wait, who's Russell? Who's Russell?" It's a while before they explain it.
Yeah. And then they talk about the little puppy that they called Anu. There's a picture on the Clive Barker archive you can see.
And they explain where the name came from.
Clive with blonde hair and Doug Bradley with like beard and short hair and glasses and little puppy. And apparently they gave it the name from the Larousse Encyclopedia of Mythology, where they found that Anu was the Assyro-Babylonian sky god, also Anu, Celtic deity. Yeah. So they decided to call him Anu. And they used to call the communal house where they lived the Ponderosa.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to read that stuff. It's, if you guys really interested in this sort of stuff about Clive's career before he made Hellraiser and before the Books of Blood, I do recommend going to the Clive Barker archive and Revelations, clivebarker.info, and get copies of the Memory, Prophecy, and Fantasy hardcover books released by Phil and Sarah Stokes. Those are really good books, and I think they're on volume 3.
Yep, 3. Well, 3 is the last one that came out.
Yeah,
and probably now that Imaginer is done, we might start seeing more of them because they're super. They're very comprehensive, and so we're only. Even with Volume 3, I think we're just up to the Books of Blood.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot more to cover in those sort of encyclopedic volumes.
So they talk a lot about the experience of being an actor. They talk a lot about the plays that they did together. And, and basically that's it. That's a really cool interview with Nicholas Vince and Doug Bradley.
Yeah. And then
I do recommend.
And then we've got another one. Nick Vince describes the process and trials and tribulations of being the Chatterer and how hard it was. I mean, everybody has nice things to say about Image Animation, and it's not their fault. But it was really tough to have to wear this costume for hours and hours and hours and be blind and deaf. And then he did the story that he also shared with us on our podcast of being hooked in the mouth during Hellbound.
Sure,
he goes over that too and how terrible that was. And it's funny that the only thing he said when that happened was "teeth out, nurse in."
Yeah. It's funny because I'm working on that Nicholas Vince interview right now, and let me just open this up, and there's some stuff on the transcript that a very funny story that he doesn't mention here. But so when he played Chatterer, he goes on to say how blind he was during that. Mm-hmm. He couldn't see anything, and how sometimes that someone would have to lead him by the hand and to take him on set. And they called him poor bastard, of course. Yeah. And someone on set actually asked someone, "Is he thick?" Because he wouldn't follow like instructions because he couldn't hear anything.
Yeah.
But so there's this story. I'm trying to locate this in our own transcript. Let's see. A very funny story of him and the woman who made the costumes for the Cenobites.
Jane Wildgoose?
No, the other one, Roe. Jane Wildgoose designed them, and Rose Sylvester actually build the suits.
Oh, okay.
Let's see. Yeah, so where is that? I think I had it around here somewhere. Well, basically, he mentions that he one time he was on set, and of course they were waiting for the scene to use him, and sometimes they go on set and they stay there for hours and hours and hours. And he says, I remember on the first movie when we were filming over in Cricklewood, the studio was in Cricklewood. The location of the house was Dollis Hill Lane. When we were in the house, I ended up by myself being in makeup, and there was a double bed. So I laid down on the double bed on one side, and my handler at the time, Rosemary Sylvester Fisher, who made the costumes, Jane Wildgoose designed them, but Rosemary actually made the costumes. We both just laid down on the bed and fell asleep. And of course, Rosemary was the first person to wake up and just turned over and found herself in bed with Chatter. The scream stopped the shooting. So that must have been interesting. Right. And Nick, at the end of this interview, talks about something that he doesn't really expound on, but he says, I haven't told you here in this interview about Chatter and the wedding dress, or playing a berserker in Nightbreed, and why another good-looking and talented actress, Anne-Marie Bobby, sang You Made Me Love You to that berserker. Find me at a convention or a signing, and I'll tell you then.
Yeah.
So I remember him talking to us about Anne Bobby singing to the berserker.
Yeah.
I don't remember him ever talking about Chatter and the wedding dress. So this might be something we need to ask Nick Vince the next time we have him on the show.
Yeah.
What is the story about the Chatter and the wedding dress,
right.
Julia's wedding dress? So I'm curious about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, this interview just goes through all the things that you probably heard a million times since then of Clive of Nicholas Vince talking about his experience being in makeup.
And then we've got Simon Bamford, and this interview focuses, it seems, mainly on his on Simon's career in
theater and movies.
Theater, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was one of the last people to join the Dog Company, so he was in a play or two, I think, right?
Yeah. Paradise Street, right, was one of them, and Secret Life of Cartoons, I think he was in. Yeah,
and Frankenstein in Love. Yeah. And so they go on to talk about that, and they talk also about being in makeup, poor Butterball, and how hard it is to have all that makeup in front of you and have, like, dentures, and you have to breathe through your mouth.
And he said that in Hellbound, this was really interesting, that in Hellbound he kind of figured out that because he had those big dark glasses, he could just kind of pick away at the foam Stitches? Around his eyes. Yeah, so that he could see better, because the glasses nobody would even knew.
Right. Yeah. That was fortunate of him to do that.
Yeah.
In the first one, he does take the glasses off, but that's just for that shock value of seeing that his eyes were stitched over.
And that probably was only like that for that shot.
Yeah. But I found out reading this interview that apparently the Onaka's nipples were prosthetic. I didn't know that.
Yeah, not only that, but he said his nipples were inverted.
Did he?
Yeah.
Was that in an interview with us that he said
No, in this interview. He says, yeah, because they had to put prosthetic nipples on me because my nipples are inverted.
Oh, wow. Too much info there.
Yeah, I know. I just kept thinking about, I bet Lori knows about this already.
TMI, Simon, TMI. Yeah, they said also, I have very sensitive nipples, so the application put me into giggles. Lots of giggles.
Yeah. And there was another time where they talked about Simon giggled through the interview, which is kind of. It seems like it keeps him young, right? He's a fun person to be around, and he's always been great to have on the podcast.
It looks like he had some really awesome. He was part of really awesome productions, like A Fiddler on the Roof, Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah.
His first monster role was for the Scottish Milk Marketing Board.
Yeah, so, and the commercial he describes makes no sense.
We were based on the planet Zongolia, and we were Zongolians. We were in bright green fur, and I had 12-day glow pink tongues and 6 eyes. We were more comedy monsters, B-movie monsters, than Hellraiser monsters. So what happens in the advert? Oh, well, 3 astronauts landed on Zongolia and were starving to death. We appeared with horrendous junk food, pink and green and orange thick milkshakes, blue and purple hamburgers and hot dogs and things. They were trying to signal to us that's not what they wanted. One of them had a special watch, and it said proteins, minerals, vitamins. And we went, aha, and opened the door in the spaceship, and suddenly all this milk came literally flooding out.
Yeah, like The Shining.
Yeah. That's,
oh, my God.
I need to find this. I need to ask Simon, is there a YouTube video for this ad for the Scottish Milk Board? Now I want to find out.
I know.
I'm going to go Google this on YouTube.
He said in the interview that he'd never seen it. But maybe since then he's found it. Who knows? God, that sounds amazing. It's nuts, right? I mean, how does that make milk look good to have it dumping out of a spaceship?
But, sometimes these commercials in the 60s and 70s were just nutty like that. So it was, yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
So, very funny, very detailed interview with Simon Bamford for people who don't know a lot about his career. And there's not a lot out there that talks about Simon's career, except maybe when our book comes out, where we talk about, he says here he went to Mount View Academy to study theater, and he ended up being colleagues with Nicholas Vince. And in our story here, in our transcript that I'm working on, at the beginning it says, the story that when he met Simon Bamford in the Mount View Academy, he says, I think I've mentioned this before, but Simon had blue hair.
Right, and he had a mohawk, which he was called, in our interview, he called it a Mohican.
Yeah, he said, yes, Simon and I were in the same year at drama school. And as Simon says, he was a punk rocker. And I remember, I think at the start of the second year, we enrolled in the theater at the school, and Simon was wearing a hat. And the registrar just insisted that he took it off. And he stood up and took off his hat off just to see what color hair he had. Bright pink. I think it was bright pink from my memory. I can just clearly remember this. So, they thought he was a punk. So that's from our transcript for the book that we're working on. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll be done with that sometime this year. I mean, really soon we're going to have our draft finished, but then we got to get it all put together and edited and stuff.
Yeah. But some great stuff in these interviews. Yeah. Really, really exciting. That reading these interviews in this Pandemonium book, I'm like, man, just wait until our book comes out. It's going to be really interesting.
So the next part, we've got the Secret Self. Dark Scribes is the next chapter, and then the first part of that is the Secret Self in Clive Barker's imaginative fiction, and it's read it's by Gary Hoppenstand, and he wrote a book which seems like it's a doctoral dissertation on Clive Barker, Imagination as Metaphor. And I started reading this, and it had I saw the word metaphor like 5 times in the first couple of paragraphs. And I was running short on time and nah, I'm just going to skip this part. I didn't read it.
Okay. So you still haven't read this since 1991, huh?
Yes.
Well, like you said, it's very academic, and he basically just goes through a lot of the Books of Blood stories. He kind of gives a little synopsis for each, tries to talk a little bit about, what's the essence of each story. And he does talk about the Books of Blood, talks about Cabal a little bit. And this is the kind of stuff he says. For example, we see the persecuted creatures of imagination elsewhere in Barker's work, and he's talking about Nightbreed, or Cabal, the novel. But he says, we see the persecuted creatures of imagination elsewhere in Barker's work, such as in Skins of the Fathers, which is a Books of Blood story, and Weave World. But the leader of these shape-shifting Israelites is Cabal's Boon. As he discovers his destiny, he finds himself as the Nightbreed's Moses. His secret self, though, is considerably less sanctimonious. After his resurrection as Nightbreed, though he retains his ego and superego, his id is animalistic. He loves the taste of blood, for example. Mm-hmm. So that's the level of, academic analysis that he puts into all these things. And it's very, very...
It made me feel like I was back in college, and and it's like, oh God, your paper is due tomorrow,
Yeah, but at the same
you
time,
get this reading done, and I just like, nope, I'm doing this for fun. I just can't do it.
But this would be really attractive for someone who's in the letters in like English and stuff.
Yeah.
And he wants to learn more, and he's a Clive Barker fan, and he wants to learn more about stuff. But for us who have read his work for 30 years, there's not really much here that we haven't already figured out.
Yeah. And
I say that without any
presumption. I also have Gary Hoppenstand's book, and it's an old library copy, and it still has the Dewey Decimal thing taped to the side of it. And I haven't read that either, and it's just like I love reading Clive Barker's work, but reading that is not exciting to me.
Yeah, well, Gary Hoppenstand at the time was a professor at the University of Michigan, and he goes from the Books of Blood all the way down to the Great and Secret Show book.
Yeah.
There's a funny, not funny, but there's an interesting summation that he puts here at the end, which says, Clive Barker is a master of each of literature's important mediums. His short stories are strikingly inventive and varied, demonstrating a dazzling display of differing styles and themes. His short novels are equally compelling, while his novels are superior examples of the epic form. In addition to his writing, Barker is a top-notch producer/director/screenwriter. Along with Woody Allen and John Carpenter, Barker is one of the few active cinematic auteurs, impressing his films with a personal vision, which is quite rare in the business of movie making these days. The horror genre in particular, and the fantasy genre in general, have greatly benefited from Barker's touch. He once said in an interview that his greatest desire as a creative force is to both entertain us and to provide us intellectual depth. He more than succeeds on both counts.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good summation of what makes Clive interesting for people like you and me and everybody else who's listening to this.
Yeah. And then we've got a really short description of the Great and Secret Show by Douglas Winter. Douglas Winter being an editor of which one of those did he do? The Dark Fantastic.
Yeah.
And so reading this was like going back in time and remembering, and it's a little embarrassing to read like how much it gushes all over Clive, because it reminds me of me at that time also, and it's like Clive is this, force, and he's so much better than everybody else, and everybody else is just stagnant and asleep and just doing the same thing over and over again. They're a bunch of Me Too's and and it's like, that I felt that way. I remember being like that, and I think some of that is unfair, not to Clive Barker, but unfair to his contemporaries,
Sure, I understand that. I mean, I think that this is what at the beginning of the episode I said I call this as kind of a publicist like promotional article for a Great and Secret Show.
Yeah. That's
what it strikes me at, because it's a lot about saying this great book is coming out and it's going to be amazing, and it's about this this time-honored template of Faustian myth, star-crossed teenage lovers. Even the way he talks about it sounds like a publicist hyping a book. So this article is very hypey in that sense.
And that's not to say that, the Great and Secret Show is amazing, and so it deserves the praise. But at the same time, it's like, do you really need to, step on everybody else to, to push this one up? I don't know. Yeah. But for a lot of reasons, this is an interesting article because it has illustrating on the sides the sketch from the British hardcover edition of the Great and Secret Show, which shows the Shoal medallion. Yep. And I have that edition, so I luckily I have that sketch in there.
Because for a lot of people who bought the Great and Secret Show in America, that apparently was never a part of the book. And in the book that I bought, it was the first thing you saw when you opened the book.
Yeah,
it says,
and not just that,
Great and
but
Secret
it had
Show, Clive Barker, and then the next page
stupid
is the drawing.
Mailbox on the front cover, Versus the UK edition has all those great pictures. You've got the EAD and and the Hollywood characters and stuff.
Exactly. And this depiction of the Jaff with the art coming out of his fingers like lightning, and he's standing on a nest of snakes.
Yeah, that's such a gorgeous edition. I saw that for sale, autographed in a glass case at the comic book shop in the Pike Place Market in Seattle. I'm like, yes, it's $60, but I have to have it, and which was a lot of money for me back then.
I got those editions, but they're soft covers. They still have the same artwork, and for example, I think the Great and Secret Show and Magica might have little accents in like golden paint.
Yeah,
I think the Magica one for sure has those, but
I have the regular U.S. edition of Magica, the hardcover with the two people, the dark skinned one and the light skinned one, and they're sort of in a yin yang.
Right?
Yeah, that's the one I have.
Yeah, I like the other. I like the other cover a little better.
Yeah,
even though I think that one's very beautiful in its simplicity. I like the one where there's this like vortex in the middle of space, and there's all these
and it's sort of depicting the Magica as a whole.
Right. Yeah. I find that really pretty. That was the first paperback I had. But this Shoal medallion, I think it's essential for someone to have a visual representation of this, even though Clive does a good job in the novel of trying to depict and describe it. Yeah. I think it's really important for people to be able to see it. So when I found out that the American version didn't have it, I was like, wow, you guys are missing out.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, to be able to have a visual representation of this crossroads of humanity, divinity, you got divinity and like primordial, and you've got evolution on the other axis, and man is right in the middle. It's very cool.
And then as we're getting closer to the end of the book, we start getting to what seems like a cliche for some of these books, especially fanzines, which is sometimes they have letters or whatever. Now, in this case, we don't have letters, but we start getting bibliography sections right at the end. Yeah. Just like in Shadows in Eden at the end, a big chunk of the book at the end is all the different Clive Barker editions that have come out. In here, we have Sex, Death, and Comics. Yeah. And it's basically just a big list of all the Eclipse publications, Clive Barker novels that were going to come out or that had come out.
But then they also do have a blurb about Epic Hellraiser.
Exactly, yeah. They do mention that.
But I mean, it does feel a little bit like, hey, we're Eclipse. Here's some more Clive Barker Eclipse stuff.
Yeah, so they're little black and white excerpts of some of these painted adaptations, like there's the Narcisse and the Witch from the Marvel adaptation. There's stories from How Spoilers Bleed, or the one about the underwater zombies that come out. What was the name of that one? Where the guys go to an island, they kill a sheep.
Scapegoats.
Scapegoats, yes, thank you. They kill a goat. Of course, there's a picture here of Leviathan and some pictures of Hellraiser comic book panels.
Yeah.
And Les Edwards.
And
yeah. But they basically are just, it's funny because it's kind of a time bubble at the time. You're reading all about this stuff. And I remember being super excited around this time because all this stuff was coming out.
Yeah.
And you were like, wow, they're going to do this. They're going to do that. And, you got all these, like, there's a series of painted, like, adaptations of Clive Barker's Books of Blood stories. Wow, I got to get them all. You're buying Rawhead Rex, and you're buying Revelations, the graphic novel, and you're getting all these things from Eclipse. And
at the time, I didn't buy these Eclipse comics because their covers were so lurid. I didn't want to have to explain it to my parents. There's that one with the woman's breasts were like had mouths on them, and it was and there was a cutout, so you open it up and you see her whole body, but if you close it, it's just the breasts, which is like,
John Tuttleben painting, where the breasts are zombie heads.
Right. I mean, I have all that stuff now, but it's back then. I don't know. It's not like I couldn't really hide stuff from my parents.
I think my parents didn't really care about that stuff. They had no interest in my comic books, so I could have collected. I got all this stuff, and nobody really cared about that.
Yeah,
because I would just put it on my shelf in my bedroom, and they were in English also, which But my parents were really permissive, and they didn't really care about movies or anything, especially horror stuff. They didn't really care about any of that. But heaven forbid that there's a freaking sex scene in a movie that you're watching in the living room, then they'll be like, oh, no, you can't watch that.
Yeah. Well, it's embarrassing because it seems like that's always when the parents come in, right?
Yeah.
So,
which is strange.
Rawhead Rex, there's a huge double-page spread of Rawhead and his big cavernous mouth, which is that's an interesting depiction of him.
Oh, yeah, you're going to the Books of Blood Portrait Gallery by John Bolton.
Yes, right.
And John Bolton also made the cover for Pandemonium. The cover of Pandemonium, if you don't have the book in front of you, it's basically a crucified Clive Barker head nailed to a small square-looking cross with tiny arms coming out of each side of the head.
Yeah, right above his ears.
Yeah, and and those little arms are nailed to the cross, and Clive has this mischievous smile.
Yeah.
And
it's a
signed
disturbing
John Bolton,
kind of a picture.
1990. So, and John Bolton also did these amazing portraits here. One of them depicts the girl in Dread.
Yeah.
The girl that Quaid locks in a room with a rotting piece of flesh until she eats.
And that's a gorgeous painting.
It is.
I love John Bolton's art. But a part of me, when I saw Books of Blood Portrait Gallery, when you read those words, you expect to see the covers, of the Clive Barker covers of the Books of Blood. And so you flip this and it's like, oh, it's just it's just like 3 pages.
Well, they're portraits of characters from the stories.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I understand what it is, but I got taken aback. It's like, oh, this is John Bolton's Books of Blood portrait galleries. Yep, and we're in a section talking about the comics, so it makes sense. But I was thinking it was going to be like we'd be able to flip through all the covers of the Books of Blood at first.
And I wonder where these things came out, because, for example, John Bolton's Rawhead Rex, this is not the Les Edwards Rawhead Rex that was published by Eclipse.
We never saw this image in the comics of this Rawhead, this crazy-looking Rawhead with a moon that's like a moon-shaped mouth. And
yeah, this actually would make a great splash image for our episode.
Yeah,
unless you want to use the Clive Barker cover as well, that's probably better.
If you can find that in the
and then of course online. There's the murders in the new Murders on Rue Morgue,
right? With the ape who looks passing for human.
Yeah, and the big straight razor.
Yeah,
and the dead woman. So it has all the elements of the old Rue Morgue story.
Yeah.
And then after that, basically the rest of the book is the first time that the History of the Devil was printed.
Right. Which we've discussed before.
Yeah. We're not going to go into it, but it's always cool when these publications would bring out something unknown and unpublished like this.
Yeah. And I think when I say that I didn't read this book, I did read the play, The History of the Devil, out of this, back then. Because, it was something written by Clive Barker that I was never published before. So that, I did read that back then. But I didn't read the rest of it up until now. Till, starting a couple of days ago. Yeah.
So that was it.
Yeah.
Pandemonium. Published by Eclipse Books. And apparently there's a limited hardcover of this, but I was looking at the paper softcover one.
Same here. And honestly, I bought this off the shelf when it was available. You would see it right around the same time as you'd see the Hellraiser Chronicles and the Nightbreed Chronicles. Mm-hmm. And that's where I got it, like from a comic shop or something. And I never knew there was a hardcover version until we were looking into getting you a copy, and then it was like, oh, hey, eBay's got a hardcover version. The
limited edition, this at the time in '91 cost $100.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was a pretty pricey book. Yeah. And the beautiful back cover painting is an Ashley Lawrence painting.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, that's an Ashley Lawrence painting. So you see this dancing woman. She's kind of like a ghostly figure. Like it seems like her body is very smoky. It's a little undefined. She's got like this kind of umbilical cord coming out of her abdomen, and she's got, looks like she's endured like some sort of, like her wrists are bleeding. So it's unsure whether those are stigmata or suicide cuts.
Holy crap. It says back cover painting by Ashley Lawrence.
Right.
I never knew that. That's amazing.
Her feet are also bleeding. It seems like there's marks of nails through the feet. So makes me think that this almost like a crucified figure rising up in a ghostly way with like this this face with white eyes and looking up, turned up at the sky, and like with her mouth open and almost like a silent howl of sorts. A very beautiful, very haunting back painting here.
Wow. That's really cool. Yeah, and that's not something you get anywhere else, right? To see an Ashley Lawrence painting in a book about Clive Barker.
Yeah. And I think I might have said this looked like a woman, but now I'm unsure.
Yeah, maybe it's just a man with long hair.
Yeah, it's in an ambiguous kind of shape. But what a fantastic book. I'm so glad that we got to read this for the episode. It was a lot of gold in these interviews, gold nuggets. And
if you get a chance, I think if you buy the paperback, it's not that expensive if you find it on eBay. Just definitely give it a try or give it a read. It's a nice thing to read to get a feel for this Clive Barker fever, that was happening, in the late 80s and early 90s.
Oh yeah, God. It was like all these things were coming out and it was so exciting and I miss that time of discovery.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I was feeling overwhelmed by all the stuff that was coming out and at the time, because it's like, hey, I'm still trying to read the Books of Blood. I gotta finish reading. I gotta get all the way through the Forbidden before I go see Candyman in the theater. And
yeah. So these Michael Brown interviews probably came out also in the Dread newsletters. I think Michael Brown was also involved with the Dread newsletter. So that's how he assembled all these articles. Some of them came from magazines like Skeleton Crew, like the Luggage from the Crypt interviews. But and Cenobium. Hi, Ed. Cenobium described it as further explorations into the worlds of Clive Barker. So very, very cool stuff. If you're into books like Shadows in Eden, which to me was a big deal when I got a copy of the hardcover.
Same. And that's right around the same time that this came out. Yeah.
But Phil and Sarah Stokes described the book as the interviews lack some bite, but are generally instructive and informative.
I think that's fair. That's kind of what we said too. Yeah. In this episode.
And apparently a second volume of this almost happened, and it was apparently all set to go, but somehow it didn't make it to print, and it was going to print out the complete text of Frankenstein in Love at the end. So that would be another a theater play that they were going to include.
Well, and I think just 4 years later, Incarnations and Forms of Heaven were published.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that kind of might have said, hey, we're already working on a book of Clive Barker plays.
Yeah. And there's some stuff here from Revelations about this book. For example, they quote John Bolton, and if you look at some of the Books of Blood gallery paintings, you can see, for example, I think the Rawhead Rex is marked 1990. So probably February of 1990. Or it says here, John Bolton says, I've just painted a portrait of Barker crucified. I have his decapitated head with the arms coming from the temples, nailed to a crucifix. I've been doing a number of portraits lately, and I have to try to get inside the person and convey that in the image. With Clive, I felt I had to corrupt it, which is really what Clive is about. Here's a nice guy, but obviously for him to do what he's doing, he has to be twisted in some way. I wanted to capture that in the painting. The thing about Clive Crucified is that it's on a black background. I could have put any number of religious totems there, but ultimately that dilutes the central image. It may have given you more detail, which sometimes can be relevant, but this had to stand up on its own. I wanted the impact of a direct positive image and not to clutter it. So he gave this interview to Speakeasy number 117 on February of 91.
Cool.
So that explains how he was like painting portraits of Clive and other creatures from his books.
Well, this was really good. I'm looking forward to also going through the Illustrator, Clive Barker Illustrator books, which I believe they came out right before this book did, 1990 maybe.
And if by any reason you happen to be Michael Brown listening to this and you're like, hey, Pandemonium, that's my book. Hey, whatever happened to Pandemonium 2? Because It says here in a Revelations review, says the mystery of Pandemonium 2 remains to this day. Several sources reported in 1992 that Volume 2 was almost ready for release, set to include information on Hellraiser 3 and Candyman. Some said that Colossus was to be included in its entirety, although Michael Brown himself reported that the centerpiece of the collection was to be the complete text of Frankenstein in Love. You mentioned Candyman not being in this book. Apparently it was planned for the second book.
Well, that's cool. So that means the second book would have been around like 92 or 93 maybe. Yeah,
that sounds like that would have been the time frame for that. But unfortunately, Eclipse went under, and I don't know. I don't know. I know for sure that's definitely responsible for probably them not having enough money to be able to complete this planned out second volume. Let's see if I can find out when Eclipse Comics went under. Yeah, it was defunct in 1993. So probably.
That's pretty close to when this would have come out.
Yeah, it was founded by Jen Mulaney and Dean Mulaney. And apparently the intellectual property for Eclipse Comics was acquired by Todd McFarlane in 1996.
So he just, buried it?
No, I mean, he bought the rights for that 3 years after it went under. So I don't know. I don't know if he ever did anything else because I haven't looked into it.
Yeah, I've never heard of any Clive Barker stuff ever getting reprinted under his banner, right?
Right. So I don't know. I would have to look into that. I'm just literally just found that out. I'm reading the Wikipedia article about Eclipse Comics.
Well, what else did they do besides the Clive Barker stuff?
It looks like they published work by Dan Brereton, Chuck Dixon, Scott McCloud, Pete Milligan.
Okay.
Gene Colan, Mark Evanier, who created Gru, The Wanderer. And the company also published Alan Moore's Miracle Man series. Yeah.
So they did have some actual comics besides just adaptations of the Books of Blood.
Oh, for sure. I mean, they existed since the 70s. So, yeah, they did a lot of stuff. We probably know them more from the Eclipse Clive Barker comic adaptations, but they had a lot of other stuff. Yeah, there is a complete Eclipse Comics index, which is huge. So, if you Google Eclipse Comics Index, you find out all the stuff that they published.
Wow.
Yeah, it's huge. It's a lot of stuff. Well, this was fun, Ryan. Thanks for joining us for this. And I hope you guys, if you have the book, I hope you followed along with us. If you don't have the book, I hope this gave you a little taste of it. And go ahead and find a copy and get it because it's really cool.
And I think if you do have the book, there's probably a lot of people out there like me who, are dusting off their copy because it's not something that people probably revisit, a whole lot.
Yeah.
But it's a neat little slice in time.
Oh, and Ryan, since you like anime and manga, Eclipse also published Mai, the Psychic Girl in the United States.
Huh. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Which is a pretty cool manga. Oh. Anyway. So this Pandemonium, having no beginning, will have no end.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope you have subscribed. You can find the Clive Barker Podcast wherever you find audio. Show notes for this episode, as well as news and reviews, can be found at our website at www.clivebarkercast.com. The Clive Barker Podcast, or BarkerCast, is an independent editorial podcast and blog that is not affiliated with or under contract by Clive Barker or Seraphim Inc. This is a labor of love by the fans for the fans. Watch for our annual Kickstarter fundraisers to get some cool stuff, and you can buy t-shirts on our TeePublic store. Go to teepublic.com and search for BarkerCast.
Thanks for listening.